Welcome back into the Long Shot Podcast here with Dylan Dethier, senior writer for the Golf Magazine and Golf.com, author of 18 in America. If you haven't heard of it, please go check it out. Former professional golfer, Williams College alum and friend of mine, and he just has a pulse on everything golf related. I think has the potential to be our future golf correspondent, depending on how this goes. But Dylan, welcome to the Long Shot Podcast. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. Hopefully my bosses aren't listening. You're gonna think I'm getting poached by the Long Shot Pod over here already. So yeah, man, it's good. This has been like a long time coming. We first partnered up on like an intramural soccer team probably like 7 years ago or something. So it's coming full circle here.
No, absolutely. I remember that vividly, actually. But before we get to some Masters coverage, I first want to talk about your story a little bit, or really have you talk about your story, just because you have a unique and interesting one. So can you just give the listeners a little bit of background on everything, basically, Dylan Dethier? You know, I want the playing experience, how you ended up with Golf Magazine and Golf.com and everything in between.
All right, yeah, so I guess to give the quick version, starting with what got me here. So I grew up in a small town, Williamstown, Massachusetts, where you and I both went to school, me for longer than you, Duncan. But once I decided that I was going to go to college in my hometown, I figured that I really needed to get out and see the world a little bit before I just spent 4 more years in the same town of 7,000 people. So I, long story short, ended up spending a year just living out of the back of my car, driving around the country, and the common thread for the year was that I played a round of golf in every state, in the lower 48. I didn't have the funding to get to Hawaii or Alaska.
Or the creativity, I might add. Or the creativity.
You know, that's a fair critique. I was in like the Pacific Northwest in like November, so Alaska did not seem like it was going to be golfing possible for many more months. So that kind of held me back. But yeah, there could be like a Hawaiian sequel there somewhere of getting to that 50th state. But anyway, so that turned into a book called 18 in America, because I was 18 years old at the time. I was playing 18 holes in every state, and it was really just a way to see the country through the lens of the game of golf. So I tried to play the cheapest public courses, the $2, $4, like $15 municipals, and then also to play the most expensive or most exclusive private courses and kind of get a full picture of what golf means in America. So that was step one. And I think hopefully, Duncan, you're an owner of 18 in America by now.
I am owner, and I've read it multiple times, and I've actually passed it on to several people. So if you've seen an uptick in sales, I'd like to take some personal responsibility for that.
All right, I love to hear that. So after that, I spent 4 years at Williams, where I played on the golf team. I was a solid contributor to our NESCAC team. I was not like an All-American or anything like that, so I was not like destined for greatness or stardom. But me and a buddy, Cody Selmarock, who was in my year, and actually played some JV basketball. So there's a little more crossover. We decided after playing pretty well in a couple summer tournaments, like, all right, man, what if we weren't just playing Division III golf in New England, where you can really play golf for like 2 months out of the school year at least? What if we just devoted all our efforts full time, maybe like you did, in the bubble, Duncan, devoted our efforts full time to playing golf, getting better at it? Could we actually get to that next level? So we turned pro out of college. We moved to Florida. I spent just over 2 years chasing the dream, and got a lot better, but also got to the point where I realized that I was not to the point that I needed to be to really like live the dream, so to speak. So I did a bunch of writing about it. Long story short, I wrote a retirement article for Golf Magazine, and that was my entry point into this world of writing about golf and covering golf. And here I am in Augusta, Georgia this week. So things are going well. I'm living a blessed life this week especially.
No, your retirement piece is one of my favorites, actually. If you get the opportunity, as the listeners out there, please check it out. You have some just interesting stories behind the grind of what it really takes to pursue professional golf. I'm actually curious here. You said that you finish up at Williams and you make the decision to turn pro. So is that just as simple as, like, could I just decide to turn pro tomorrow? I mean, I'm giving you way more credit than that because you're a really good golfer, but like, what is that? Like, shine a little light on, and obviously you do in your article of kind of the steps that it takes, but there's a lot that goes into just being a professional golfer. I think in your little recap, you undersell what that really encapsulates. Just talk a little bit more about that.
So, yeah, I mean, the actual process of turning pro, that scene in The Office where Michael Scott, like, wants to declare bankruptcy, so he just goes and, like, screams, like, bankruptcy in the middle of the office? It's pretty much like that. You basically just show up to a tournament and you say that you're entering as a professional, and then suddenly you can't really be an amateur anymore, for a little while at least, especially if you make money. And they've gone back and forth on what it exactly means to be an amateur versus a pro, and that's a whole nother story that I got embroiled in at Williams, actually, at the same time. But you can just become a pro and enter like a mini tour event, and there are a bunch of these that at the bottom level of the game, it's essentially just pay to play. So I turned pro at the Providence Open in Rhode Island, which is, the winner got maybe like 10K if you win like a 2-round tournament, and if you finish 10th, then maybe you get like $600. So like at the entry point to the pro game, it's not a glamorous life. You're basically playing for each other's entry fees. And so a lot of what I did, especially to start, was that sort of thing, was like basically competitive practice, where you're trying to raise the stakes so that you get used to playing under the gun and getting better in those competitive situations. And then theoretically, then you train up for making it through qualifying school, which is really how you get to the next level. And there's different levels to that. So the peak of my professional career, so to speak, was I qualified for the Canadian Tour, it's probably AA baseball. It's not like the G League. That's the next level up. That's like now it's called the Korn Ferry Tour. It was called the Web.com Tour. So the Canadian Tour is like one rung below that, but it's still, it's just filled with these studs that were like playing D1 golf at Georgia and, Texas. And I remember I played my first practice round there once I'd qualified to get up there. I played with this guy named Tony Hakula, and he was, this little guy from Finland, and it's like, what's your story? How'd you end up here? He had just won a national championship playing for the University of Texas, where he played number 2 and Jordan Spieth played number 1. So I was like around the greatest golfers I'd ever seen, and this guy was like, couldn't believe that he wasn't on the PGA Tour. So that was like, it was a real adjustment from the NESCAC.
That aspect of golf is so interesting to me because it doesn't exist in many other sports. And you talk about this in your retirement piece, the battle against time that professionals are against, because, and you talk about this in your piece, but someone like Duncan, if he's not elite by this age, it's pretty certain that he's not going to play professional basketball. But in golf, it's like you're always chasing that peak. It's like, well, I could peak in 5 years. I could peak in 10 years. So how did you come to terms with retirement when you're in your 20s? I assume you feel like you're as good at golf as you've been. How do you decide to pack it up and walk away?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I was continuing to get better. There was a stretch where I was trying to kind of evaluate where I was, and I got to the point where at my home course, I played a month without shooting a round that was worse than even par. So that was like kind of the level I'd gotten to. I wasn't shooting like 63 all the time or anything, but I was playing really consistent golf. My threshold was getting a lot higher. But I played a few of the bigger tournaments, like the qualifying schools. This stuff is so expensive that eventually I just ran out of money. So that was a part of it. And then you face the decision to, either pursue like investors, but I didn't feel like I was a great investment, so I felt a little bit weird about that. Or you get a job to support you chasing the dream, but at that point you're not setting yourself up to probably perform your best. So it just reached a point where it seemed like the calculus was against me, and as good as I felt like I was getting, it didn't seem like I was going to be close to being like top 10 in the world at any one part of the game. And that's pretty much what you need to do. If you're not hitting it, 330 with some of these guys, and I was medium length or a little above average length probably for the mini tour stuff that I was playing. But certainly not out there with like Bryson or Dustin Johnson or something. So if you're not going to do that, then you better be one of the better people in the entire world at hitting your irons, at putting, at getting up and down around the greens. And it felt like I was far enough away from that the calculus sort of pointed me in the direction of trying something else.
I wanted to ask you, Dylan, I wanted to go back to your time at Williams and specifically that year with Dunk. I think there's a belief that, Duncan playing Division III basketball, it was just this, glaring misrecruitment. This guy who goes to this school and is clearly an NBA player and stands out. You were going to Williams basketball games his freshman year. Did you see it that way? Like when you watched him play, was it like, oh my God, this guy's not supposed to be here? Or was it, just this guy's pretty good at basketball, but he's still, this scrawny 6'6", 6'7" kid. Looks like a lot of other Division III basketball players.
I'm really glad you asked this because I feel like there's a couple different things that need to get cleared up. Like, first of all, growing up as a kid in Williamstown, like Williams basketball is legit. Like I watched Williams beat Division I teams when I was a kid. So it's definitely like, yes, it's a Division III school, but it's a pretty great Division III school. With that said, there were a few people that stood out like during my college career that just felt like, man, you don't really belong in this exact game. Duncan was very much in that category. I mean, Williams had, we'd always joke that everyone on the team was like 6'4" and could just, shoot like 45% from three. And Duncan like had a better handle, was 4 inches taller, was just like smoother all around, and could shoot like 60% from three instead of like 40%. But yeah, it was like one of the most ridiculous sharpshooting teams though to just be around. Like I'm sure Duncan lost shooting contests to some of these other guys all the time because like everyone had to shoot the three to be on that team. That was just like how the system seemed like it was run. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong here, Duncan. But it was a really good team that he was on. But yes, he still was far and away the best player on the court at all times.
I'm going to push back on that for a variety of reasons. One, I've maintained this stance for a while. I actually was not the best player on that team. Mike Mayer was the best player on that team. So shout out to him. He was a senior All-American my freshman year and was really, really good. You make a completely valid point that Williams College basketball is a really high level of basketball, and I've gone to great lengths to defend Division III sports because I think
you have, yes.
Yeah, I think anybody that competes in college, that's a high level in and of itself, and I can't stand it when it's the D1 or bust, or, if you're not getting a scholarship, then you're not legit or anything like that. If you are good enough to get recruited by any college, but let alone, a place like Williams or, a place of that kind of caliber, then you play your sport at a very high level. But I once again, I will push back on that I was the best player because I don't think I was. We could transition away. As much as I love reminiscing on the Williams times,
I knew Williams talk would get him quickly off the subject.
I'm curious. You talk about the Canadian Tour quite a bit, and you just alluded to it earlier, of it's this weird mix of elite talent, but also these basically suboptimal living conditions. It's almost as if the talent doesn't line up with the situation and the circumstance. And that's something that I've experienced in my career, particularly with the G League, in that I'm a strong believer in that the G League is, talent-wise, the second best league in the world. Now, people are getting paid $30,000 a year, below minimum wage, essentially, taking multiple flights, staying in, 2 and 3 star hotels. Now it's gotten a lot better. But I'm interested in, you have this large pool of talent. What did you learn in your experience of just how important that mental component is to actually being able to realize that talent and take that next step in towards consistently being your best version?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think this is maybe something that actually does translate from something like golf to something like hoops, which is the thing that seems to separate the guys that make it from the guys that don't is the ability to kind of be relentless and like come back after you screw something up. I mean, I can't tell you how many guys I played with that looked like, top players in the world for 5 holes or something, and then something goes wrong. You hit a quick hook off the tee, something happens, a putt lips out, and these guys would just start to hot wire something. They would blow a fuse basically and just start to lose it mentally, where the very best players, you see guys with tempers. Tiger is a perfect example, who gets pissed, hits a bad shot, gets pissed, and then moves on like instantly. It's like you get, I can't remember exactly what he said, but maybe you get 9 steps or something after you hit a shot, and then you move on, you compartmentalize, you don't let that stick with you. So I think that was definitely my experience in terms of seeing like the separation between the guys that had talent and the guys that really were going to have longevity and were going to move up in the game and could perform, even when the times got tough. And it's funny that the travel thing, we realized at a certain point that of the 150 or 200 guys on the Canadian Tour, probably 175 were losing money, maybe more, just based off of travel. So if take me, for example, I missed most of the cuts up there. But I also had this sort of status where I wasn't sure if I would be in the tournament each week. So if you are not in the tournament, you can play in the Monday qualifier, where they have a few spots open each week. So my schedule would be I would be playing a tournament in, say, Winnipeg, and then I would go from Winnipeg to, I'd have to go somewhere in Ontario the next week. And if I don't know if I'm going to miss the cut or make the cut. So I've got to have a flight ready for Friday, but also Sunday. And then I don't know if I'm in the Monday qualifier or not in the Monday qualifier. So then I've got to be ready to get to a practice round there. And so if things are going well, then you can kind of keep them going, but you can get into a vicious cycle of bad golf, just building on bad golf, and then compounding with a lot of travel expenses. And so you can see things that once you get things going on the wrong path, it's tough to really come back.
I want to unpack a quote from one of your articles, in that you say, in golf, everyone is kind of trash right up until the moment when they're not. It's a sport where progress is confusing. And you go on to reference, PGA Tour golfers who, wait and go through these, crazy paths of playing Q schools and web.com and Corn Ferry Tour, everything until they finally get their break. And it actually reminds me of, Davis and I have a couple friends who've gone out to LA to try to break into the acting world. And it's as an actor, it just takes that one moment to break through and start to build that confidence. And something that I've experienced in my career is so much of success is dependent on the ability to develop a resolve to be able to withstand adversity and failure. And that if you can, just like you said earlier, keep showing up, then that alone is probably your biggest strength and separator. What is it that you have seen from, maybe it's guys that you played against on the PGA Tour of Canada or just in Q School events coming up? What have you seen as, we talked a little bit about the mental component, but what have you seen as a big time separator between the ones that are able to break through and the ones that aren't? And maybe these are guys that you've covered that are now doing their thing, weekend to weekend on the PGA Tour.
I think, you mentioned the ability to just keep coming back over and over, and I think that's it. But I think it's also guys that fall in love with the process of becoming great, and guys that aren't just, willing to put in a couple hours, but are actually actively interested in that. That's the thing that fuels them. So it's not just a matter of putting in X hours at the golf course per day, but it's like every shot you hit on the range is hit with a purpose. Every time you do something at the course during practice, there's an intentionality to it. And there's also a sense that you're all in and you're cool with being all in. It's a little bit of this, burn the boats mentality. There's no backup plan. It's a reason that a lot of the guys that, play on some of those lower levels come from pretty privileged backgrounds, I would say. But the ones that make it through aren't necessarily, golf like on a certain level is always restricted to like people that have means to some extent. That's a whole other topic. We're hoping that gets a lot better. But the people that get through to the next level are a lot of the time not the people that had a putting green in their backyard growing up. It's people that really fall in love with that grind, that come back to the grind, that don't blow a gasket when something goes wrong, but instead just work pretty analytically and passionately at getting better and sticking with it. And it's, I'm actually interested if you feel that trash line applies to basketball at all, Duncan, because I feel like it would be less true, but maybe, given like the arc of your career, like you probably had some moments where you felt like, oh man, like what is my upside here? What's my future? And then suddenly here you are.
Yeah, I think part of the reason why that line jumped out to me is because I do think there's truth to it in a variety of fields. I think that maybe the difference is that it's more common in maybe football or basketball that you see. And once again, I don't think in general success is linear or progress is linear, but I think it's more common in those sports that you see that, and that, the number one player in the high school class ends up being, a college All-American, and then ends up being a lottery pick. That trajectory and that arc is incredibly common. I think there's always anomalies to that. And I think that I kind of fall into that camp of somebody who took this kind of roundabout, crazy kind of story. But absolutely, I think back to, even when I was finishing up at Michigan and what the next step of my career looked like. And the vast majority of my opportunities was overseas, in that I was pretty much under the impression that I was going to be, starting my career in Latvia or Bosnia or, someplace, Lithuania, something like that. And then I ended up, somewhere in between Sioux Falls, South Dakota and South Beach. But I'll take it. So I definitely think that there's some truth and there's some comparison there. But the thing that's so interesting to me about golf is you highlighted is that there are so many stories like that of guys that kind of bounce around and take their time, and then they get that moment, play well at the right time, and then break through. You bring up, and since you brought it up, I want to take it there. You bring up how golf has historically been a somewhat class-restricted game. And there are so many people, and you and I have had these conversations, that are lobbying and hoping for an increase in access. A question that I have for you is how do you actually, and not maybe you personally, but as an ambassador of the game, or maybe USGA, how did they go about remedying this? I know that there have been concerted efforts, but what can they do additionally to continue to afford opportunities for everybody to get involved? Because I think that that's when the game will be at its best, is when there's just a wealth of opportunities for a variety of people and a variety of backgrounds.
Yeah. I think the key, and there's been a ton of initiatives, the First Tee is massive. There's all these programs that do work with, organizations all over to try to get more people involved. But I think it's just so hard without a true grassroots approach, and getting people in the community, because at the end of the day, right now, the people that are making those decisions are pretty far removed from the folks that they're trying to get involved in the game. And that's probably the biggest issue, is like golf as a world is still pretty separated from, like kids in the inner city, say. So I volunteered a little bit at this school in Harlem when I lived in New York that would, they actually set up a golf program, got one started at a charter school there. And I remember going and riding with their coach to like pick these kids up at school. And then it hit me much more so like how much of a departure it was for these kids to be going to golf practice after school. And so I think it's one thing to have initiatives, but then you need the people on the ground doing the work, and supporting those people is going to have to be like the biggest key to the game. I mean, you say like, yeah, it shouldn't be my responsibility. On some level, it does fall to people like me, I think, to keep highlighting that. And I don't know, I do this little column every Monday. It's called Muni Mondays, just to highlight the stories from the world of just public golf, municipal golf, because the natural storylines in the sport are highlighting places like Augusta National, where I'm going to go right after we hang up here. And so just to shine a spotlight on some of the stuff that's happening, where the greens fees cost, $10 instead of, oh, you can't even get in there unless you know a rich person. That I think that sort of thing is hopefully helpful in some tiny way.
For those who may be watching on YouTube, it literally looks like you're on the first tee there in Augusta. But yeah, I want to transition to the Masters because, as we alluded to maybe earlier, that now officially you are our golf correspondent. So I want to talk a little bit about Augusta, the Masters, the event coming up this weekend. But just before, I kind of want to take the 10,000 foot approach here first. What is it about the Masters? Everybody that I talk to that's been talks about how it's just like the pinnacle of live sporting events, that if you have the opportunity to get there, to see it in person, that you have to take advantage of it. What is it from your perspective about the event that just makes it so special?
It's really the moment when you walk onto property, I think, the first time, and you just see, I saw an interview with one of the guys that's in charge of communications there, and he said, for us, perfect that's just good enough. And like that whole idea it's absurd, it's ridiculous, and the whole place is ridiculous to some extent. But still, when you walk onto property and it's not just the shots that you've seen on TV, but the whole property kind of opens up in front of you, and it's anyone that goes there for the first time, their first reaction will always be like, oh man, it's so much hillier in person than when you're at home. The elevation changes are so crazy. So that's the first thing. But then, yeah, also seeing, like, people know the tee shot at 12, that par 3 where everyone hit it in the water when Tiger won in 2019. People know, like, the risk reward par 5s on 13 and 15, and they know, like, the tee shot up the chute on 18. But then to see the way those holes are actually connected to other holes, and that the property is actually a real place, but it's a place where everything is bright green and there's not a blade of grass out of place. It's really surreal. And I guess, one thing we were just talking about, because we just went and got our COVID tests on property, and there's a guy walking around the edge of the property with a garbage bag and with sort of like what would look like a trash picker-upper, But this guy is not picking up trash. He's picking up sticks and pine cones because that just won't fly to be on the ground there. So that's like the level of detail that we're talking about.
So you talk about the elevation, the hilliness of the course. Are there some other characteristics of Augusta that make it particularly challenging for golfers?
I think the average golfer would have a really hard time with like the tight lies. There's not much rough, which, you know, in general you'd think, yes, that makes it easier, but actually around the greens, it makes it much more uncomfortable. So if you miss your spot, not only does it miss the green, but it just starts rolling and it keeps rolling. And then you don't really have the extra fluff of the rough to like help you hit a chip back up towards the green. So I think, you know, if you were playing as a guy that maybe shoots 90 somewhere else, you would actually have a fine time getting off the tee at Augusta. It's pretty open. Like, you wouldn't lose a ton of golf balls. It's just when you got around the greens, you would start to really suffer. And you would really appreciate just how precarious a lot of those short game shots are.
It feels like you're talking about my game.
It's not directed at you, Davis.
Consistently in the 90s. But we're changing that all this summer, man. We're getting our games right this summer. 100%. All right, give us a little update, insight into the fields. Maybe a favorite to win. Who do you like? Why? Or just maybe in general, just some like fun storylines. You know, if people are tuning in on Thursday, what to look out for.
I mean, of course, the biggest story in some ways in golf is always Tiger Woods. So his absence is always lurking there. But in terms of guys that are actually on property, I think Bryson DeChambeau is playing the best golf of anyone in the world right now. He was kind of a letdown in the Fall Masters, but I don't think that should convince anyone that he's not going to play well this time. I would be pretty shocked if he's not at least in the picture come Sunday. Dustin Johnson has not been playing quite as well. He ran away with things in the fall. He should be in the mix, but I don't like him quite as much as Bryson. Everyone's really high on Jordan Spieth, who just won last week. I think there could be a little bit of a letdown, but again, hopefully he's someone that's in the picture. If you guys are looking to invest, I'm high on a guy, Xander Schauffele, who's in that second tier of guys. He's like sort of a perpetual sleeper, hasn't won a major championship yet, but you know, the course is looking firm and fast this week. It's hopefully going to play a little bit more like U.S. Opens sometimes do. And so you look at guys that are really steady, really good irons players. So someone like Xander Schauffele could play well. And then if you're looking further down the list, my guy Will Zalatoris, who I ran into in a grocery store yesterday, is just a really good ball striker, really good irons player, and I think that's going to be at a premium this week, and he's more like 100-1, so he could be a good investment.
Does Will Zalatoris get hyped up when he gets recognized in a local grocery store?
Actually, so yeah, I say I ran into him. I didn't even say hi because I was checking out and we were just stocking up our like rental for the week, and so I was holding like 24 Bud Lights and then like a thing of red wine. So I just felt like such a degenerate that I was like, maybe just play this one cool and we'll say hi at the course tomorrow.
Real quick, Dylan, I'm interested in your take on the difference of playing with limited fans. Does that make a real impact on pressure, moment? Is that a real thing in your opinion?
It's a real thing on Saturdays and Sundays in the final groups because it's just so different. At the Masters in particular, but also at a bunch of these other, tournaments like the Waste Management, places that would typically have massive crowds. There's something very different about playing golf when you kind of abstractly know it's on television versus when people are right there. And I mean, one of the funnest parts of my job has been being there when, say, Tiger Woods is in contention. Or Rory McIlroy is in contention to a lesser degree. But for the reputation golf has as being, slow and boring, there are a few things that are more tense and would make your heart race, like having to hit a pressure shot with that many people watching, kind of in silence, just waiting to erupt. So I think that it's hard to quantify. I think that's why we have a hard time talking about it because, some guys would actually probably perform better with all that scrutiny. some guys would crumble, and there's no real way to know who's who, and it's hard to put like a value on it. But yes, it makes a difference for sure. It has to.
I remember watching in 2019 Tiger's tee shot on 18 at the Masters and seeing the gallery lined up the shoot right there and just envisioning myself who I would have hurt, who I would have potentially killed if I was trying to get off the tee in that situation. Just absolutely no clue where the ball would have gone. Probably like a sharp hook or just sprayed it to the right and just, decapitated somebody. All right, let's move on here to our undrafted segment, kind of wrap it up. We appreciate you. We know you have a big week ahead, so we want to get you out of here. So basically, it's been a little while since we've done our undrafted segment, but basically the overlooked, underappreciated aspects, right? So we're going to give you 3 different topics. I'm going to start it off. You referenced your 18 in America early, so you've been a United States traveler. I want to know your undrafted state in America, the uncoveted gem of the U.S. Lower 48, I should say.
Okay. All right. So I'll just go with just from a golf perspective, since this has been a golf themed podcast. I think that North Dakota is super slept on in general, just very slept on in general. But from a golf perspective, I think, you would maybe think going in like, oh, are there even golf courses in North Dakota? But what I found there was some of the most spectacular scenery, landscape, holes that you're playing up like through the Badlands, and some pretty spectacular golf courses for cheap prices. I mean, when you compare them to like near a major metropolitan area, you're paying 15-20% of the greens fees that you would pay for some spectacular golf. So North Dakota is flying way under the radar.
Love that answer.
Yeah, I love it too. All right, I'll give you the next one. We've got this one could go a variety of ways. We've got an underappreciated aspect of golf. So through this conversation, we've heard some birds chirping in the back from you, Dylan. I don't know, maybe it's being out in nature. Maybe it's hearing birds chirp. Is there something when you think of the game that is underappreciated?
All right, a sleeper piece of golf. I think what people sleep on is the exercise that you get from golf. I mean, there's rounds in your carts where you're definitely not so much, but if you walk 18 holes, that means you're walking probably 7 to 8 miles carrying something on your back. So like, you've earned your beer at the end, because like that's no joke. I mean, how often do you just walk around like town for 7 or 8 miles in a given day? That's going to be a big walking day. But in a round of golf, you do it, you just do it in 4 hours. So I think people sleep on the health benefits of playing golf.
Love that. Advocate for the game in so many ways. My answer to that, for sure, I literally don't care what I score. If I flush an iron, I'll come back the next day. Like literally all I need is just like a handful of flushed irons and I'm hooked. That's all I need. All right, the last one we got, this is for maybe your recreational golfer, a golf skill that should be meticulously honed. So if you're just, kind of you're a recreational golfer, you're playing in the local community, whatever it is, if you want to elevate your game and if you can really improve on this one aspect of golf, what would it be?
So I'll give you 2 quick ones, because one is kind of based on the other. Like, you got to be able to get off the tee and get the ball in play. And maybe Bryson is setting a bad example for the youth by just trying to fly the ball 400 yards. But if you're just trying to go out and have a good time and not ruin your day by looking for a golf ball on every hole, it doesn't matter if you're hitting it, 175 off the tee. If you can just put it in play, you're going to have such a better experience. And then the other one is just practice your putting a little bit. Like, nobody does it. And I play with a bunch of guys. Actually, I just moved to Seattle. I play with a bunch of 30 handicaps. These guys will grind on the driving range and then, maybe hit like 2 putts on their way to the first tee, and then 3 or 4 putt every single hole. Like, every hole. There is a 2 putt is just a rarity. So I think that go spend a little bit of time on your putting, because that's where you take half your shots anyway.
I feel personally attacked. I felt like that was directed at me, but I'll take it for what it is. All right, Dylan, man, we really appreciate it. Once again, Dylan is boots on the ground in Augusta. He's got a big week coming up covering the Masters. But thank you for taking the time, man. You have an incredibly interesting story, and obviously we go back a little ways, so it's always nice to chop it up. So thank you.
Guys, it's been a joy. It's good to be with some NESCAC folks, and we'll keep you posted from Augusta this week. Thanks for having me.
All right, love it. And if you have the opportunity, please check out Dylan's writing. He's an incredibly gifted writer, and just a joy to read. So be on the lookout for that.